Okay, let's take a look at chapter 17, which is in your book on page 473, if you want to turn there. Chapter 17 deals with valuation. One of the most important jobs that we have as real estate brokers is to give our clients an educated opinion about the value of either property that they own that we're going to be selling for them, or property that they are making an offer on as a buyer. It doesn't matter if we're representing a buyer or a seller, we owe it to our client to always give an opinion of value. If you see that on a test somewhere, what kind of clients do we provide with an opinion of value? What's the answer going to be? All of them. All of them. We don't allow them to go into a transaction without getting an opinion of value. So first thing we need to talk about is a formal opinion of value. Appraisals are a formal opinion of value. The key thing is it's still an opinion. What makes it a formal one is that it's done by a person who's licensed to do it. Who is that person? An appraiser. That's exactly right. We're not appraisers. We don't have, and nor will you have, unless you go get an appraiser's license, the ability to provide a formal opinion of value. Remember that an appraisal, just like any other opinion of value, is only good for the day it's done. That's one of the most important things to remember. I cannot tell you how much you will want to slap somebody in this business. I had my house appraised 6 months ago. Yeah? I had Mexican 3 weeks ago. What does that make a difference about tonight? Nothing at all. What happens in the market every single day? It changes. An old appraisal is just as good as no appraisal at all. They're good for the day they're conducted. Any opinion of value is only as good as that one day, because it's a snapshot in time of the value of that property. Okay? Now, we as real estate brokers do give opinions of value. We just call them informal opinions of value. And there are two different ways that we as a real estate broker can give our opinion on value. And the only thing that's going to differentiate them is whether we do it for a client or whether we do it for somebody who's not a client. If we give an opinion of value for a client, that's called a CMA, a comparative market analysis. A CMA is an opinion of value that we give to a client, whether that's a seller client or a buyer client. It's something that we do for somebody we represent. Now, we can also give opinions of value to people that we don't represent. Sometimes people want to just pay us for the opinion of value. They just want to know, what's my home worth? They have no intention of selling it, no intention of putting it on the market. Sometimes it's maybe not even their house. Maybe a bank contacts you and says, we'd like to know what this house is worth. We can do that. That's called a broker price opinion. Now, when it comes to broker price opinions, what does it say right here? They can be performed by who? Non-provisional brokers. PBs cannot do these. A provisional broker cannot do them. Do you think that's fair game for a test question right there? Absolutely. Provisional brokers are not allowed to do these broker price opinions. In fact, a provisional broker can't be paid for an opinion of value at all, whether it's a CMA or a broker price opinion. We, as a provisional broker, you can do a CMA, but you do it for what? For free. You can't charge for it. You can charge for it once you're a non-provisional broker, and if you're doing it for a client, it's still called a CMA, but if you're doing it for somebody that's not a client, it's called a broker price opinion. No matter which one you do as a real estate broker, you always use this phrase, a probable sales price. And I've got that underlined. It's important. That language is important because we want to make it clear that this is not an appraisal. And that's the way we make it clear that this is not an appraisal, because we don't say this is the market value of the property. What we say is this is the probable sales price of the property. Is everybody good on that? And try to stay away from using words like value or worth or that kind of language. We want to just say probable sales price. So what things affect value? Demand. The more in demand it is, the more valuable it is. Utility or usefulness. If a property can be used for more things, does it have more value? Yeah, absolutely. Scarcity. The more rare a particular type of property is, the more what? The more value it has. Take waterfront property, for example. The reason waterfront property is so valuable is because there's relatively little of it. And then the last one, transferability. Does it have deed restrictions? Does it have things that limit the ability to transfer it? Is a life estate harder to sell than fee simple absolute? Yes, absolutely. So all those things would affect the value. Now, we got some terminology that we come across here. Market value, market price, and cost. Because we use these a lot in this chapter. Market value is a prediction, an opinion. It has not yet happened. When we say the market value of something, we're talking about a prediction of what it would bring in a competitive and open market. Is everybody good with that? What it would bring if it were sold on a competitive and open market. So let's talk about that for a second. Competitive and open market's important. What are some things that could happen in a transaction that would make it not be a competitive or open market? What are some things that would limit value? In other words, if I were looking at them, I would say, you probably should ignore that one because that's not really a good indicator of the value of the property. Give me some examples. Can you think of anything? Foreclosures. If the property's sold as a foreclosure, see, here's the thing. You all know all this stuff, but you act like it's hard because it happens to be in a book. If you own a house in your neighborhood and you're trying to sell it, and I show up at your house and I say, well, your house is worth this because the house across the street just sold for $150,000, what's the first thing you would say if that was a foreclosure? This is a foreclosure. Why the hell are you going to compare it to my house? Right? Don't act like this is complicated. It's not. It really is not. The things that affect value are the things that we talk about every single day in our day-to-day lives. So when we think about an open and competitive market, what are the conditions of the sale? Was it a foreclosure? Was it a short sale? Those would be things that we might want to say, might not want to look at that. That's probably not a good indicator. How about if Tina sells it to her sister? Would that be a problem maybe as far as considering that for market value? Because she's likely to do what if she's selling it to her sister? Give her a deal, depending on how much she likes her sister. It might go the other way. You just never know. So those kinds of things we want to stay away from. When we talk about an open and competitive marketplace. But market price is different than market value. Market value, remember, is a prediction, an opinion. What do you think market price is? What it actually sold for. What it actually sold for. And then this last one, cost. Cost is meaningless in most cases when we talk about value, particularly when we talk about value in residential properties. When you're doing a CMA on a residential property, you don't care what something costs. Because what are you trying to predict? Value, but get deeper than that. You're trying to predict what? Probable sales price. And who's going to pay a probable sales price? A buyer. So what are you trying to predict? How much a buyer will pay for that thing. So what matters? What the seller paid for it or how much a buyer is willing to pay for it? How much a buyer is willing to pay for it. So when you get involved with a seller and every third sentence out of their mouth is, well, I paid this and I spent that. Yeah? You know who cares? Not me. And you know why I don't care as a real estate broker? Because my job is not to tell them what they want to hear. My job is to tell them what a buyer is going to say. And do buyers care what the seller paid for something? No. So you don't weigh that as a factor. When you're talking about value, the cost of something is completely meaningless. What it means is that it's worth what a buyer is willing to pay for it. If you have two homes and they're roughly identical, and one has a screen porch and the other does not, and the one with the screen porch sells for $10,000 more than the one without a screen porch, how much is a screen porch worth in that neighborhood? $10,000. Does it matter that the screen porch cost $18,000 to put on? Not at all. Not at all. And so that's another thing to remember. When we get into the math of this, you notice what you all just did naturally right there? I said if you had two things sell and they were pretty identical except for one thing, then the difference in price must be the one thing. When we get to math later on today, you're going to be crying. You're like, I don't understand this. Remember that example because it never gets more complex than that. The math in this chapter is not hard. There's a ton of it. But it's not hard. It's common sense if you'll get your brain out of the way. That's really the truth of it. Thinking gets in the way of the math in this chapter. It really does because most of it are things that are so rooted in us we don't even realize we do them on a daily basis. Okay? Some principles of value. We've already talked about highest and best use previously. What did we say highest and best use was? The thing that we could do with the property to get the biggest return, the best return on our investment at that given time. Because highest and best use can do what? Can change over time. So when we calculate the value of a property, we try to predict the probable selling price of a property. And when an appraiser tries to predict the value of a property, they're not really looking at what it's being used for currently. They're looking at what is the best use for that property. Now, it would be nice if the best use is also the current use, but that's not always the case. Okay? One of the first things we have to decide is the highest and best use. Another principle of value that you need to be real familiar with, the principle of substitution. The principle of substitution. I call it the Walmart principle. Why do people shop at Walmart? For the wonderful service, right? Why do they shop there? Prices. Principle of substitution says if you give people the choice between two identical or very similar things, they're going to buy what? The cheaper of the two. That is the principle of substitution, and it is the entire basis for the way we value residential property. Because when we value residential property, like I said, we don't look at what something cost. We value it based on what buyers have previously been willing to pay for the same thing. If somebody was willing to pay $100 a square foot in this neighborhood last week, then guess what it's worth today? $100 a square foot, because it's the best data we have to predict what they're willing to. Does that make sense for everybody? So the principle of substitution just says that when we have similar things, people are going to buy the least expensive one. And that's this, if you break it down to a level when you talk about salesmanship, is really super important. You know what one of the most effective tools, and this is not on the test, but you'll need it in the real world. You know what one of the most effective tools to use is when you have a buyer, or excuse me, when you have a seller who's overpriced, where they just, you've talked to them, you've recommended, they're overpriced, they need to reduce their price, and they won't do it. You know what one of the most effective things you can do with them is? Put them in a car and take them to the other houses in the neighborhood. The ones that they're more expensive than, the other ones that are on the market, and walk them in that house and stand them right there and say, Dennis, show me $20,000 that's in your house that's not in this one. Find it, point it out to me, and I'll shut up about the pricing. I won't say another word. You find it. I'll give you an hour. I'll sit right here and wait. You know what they'll do? They'll look at you and go, yeah, exactly. Because if you can't find it and you're the one telling me it's supposed to be there, how in the hell is a buyer supposed to find it? Right? That's the principle of substitution at work. Because people shop comparatively. You can be more aggressive with pricing if nothing else is on the market because they don't have a point of reference. But if something else is on the market at the same time you are, that's virtually the same as what you're selling and it's cheaper, you are dead in the water. It doesn't matter what you think. It matters what they see to compare with. Is everybody good with that? All right. Another principle of value, conformity. The principle of conformity says that properties that are similar to what surrounds them are going to get the highest return on investment. We don't want to be over-improved. How many of you all have ever seen a house in a neighborhood and you just thought, God, how did that get here? Good or bad, right? Sometimes it's like, what is that dump in this neighborhood? And sometimes it's like the other way around, like, why is that house here? You know, you ever driven through a neighborhood that was just so-so and all of a sudden there's just mansions sitting there and you're like, what is that? Well, that reaction costs you money. So the principle of conformity says you're going to get the best return on your investment when you are similar to your surroundings. As much as we'd like to think we don't like cookie-cutter neighborhoods, from an investment standpoint, we do. They bring the greatest return. And then this last one is something we've already hinted at, the principle of contribution. This is basically what I talked about when I talked about cost. That the value of any single improvement, a garage, a fireplace, a swimming pool, a square foot of living area, the value of any single improvement is what a buyer is willing to pay for that single improvement. Or how much they're going to deduct if it's not there. It's the same thing. You know, sometimes buyers walk in, they go, well, I like this house, but it's 3 baths instead of 3.5, so I wouldn't be willing to pay. Blah, 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 blah. So it's either what they're willing to pay if it's there or what they're not willing to pay if it is not there. That's the principle of contribution. Now, before we get too far into the principle, the approaches to value here, I want to talk to you roughly about something that is sort of my pet peeve when it comes to doing valuation, because people don't understand how this works. You know that commercial with the old women, they go, that's not the way any of this works. You know, I feel like that a lot when I start talking about CMAs and valuation. And it's fed because we're lazy, and it's fed because we use computers for everything. Dollars per square foot is the most misleading statistic in the world. Because I'll show you how most of the time when somebody gives you a dollar per square foot number, I'll show you what they do. Well, my house sold for $300,000 and it's 2,300 square feet. You know what we do with that? You know what's commonly done with that? They just take 300,000, divide it by 2,300. Somebody got a calculator? $130 and how much? 43 cents. Here's why this number is absolutely stupid and means nothing. If I built a ranch style house on this is a 2-story house, and I built a ranch style house on this same exact lot. Is everybody with me so far? How many square feet could I build? More or less? More or less if I built a ranch.
Oh, for a ranch. Oh.
Less, significantly less. If this is a 2-story house, the ranch is going to be 1 story, right? Less. How did the size of the lot change at all? No. Did the cost of the lot change at all? No. If I do the math, is the dollar per square foot going to vary dramatically for a ranch versus this house? You know why? Because this stupid math doesn't take into account that the lot itself has what? Value, a significant amount of value. Here's why this stupid math will throw you off in the real world. Because when you start trying to adjust for square footage, you start adjusting at $130 a square foot. That's crazy. That's a lie. Because that number actually includes the cost of the land. And guess what's not changing? The land. So you can never do it this way. You have to take the land value out. In the real world, please remember that. When you start looking at the actual cost of square footage in a particular neighborhood, you have to deduct the land value. Because they're buying two things. They're buying the land, plus they're buying the improvement that's sitting on the land. So if you have a house that's 100 square feet difference, you don't want to adjust 100 square feet at $130 a square foot, because inherently you're also adjusting the land, which didn't change. Does that make sense for everybody? You see why you can't do it that way? It doesn't work that way. That also means as we get into this math, when they tell you, bring it back to something that means something in the class, you can't build a house using the adjustment values they're going to give you. If they say that we're adjusting living area at $100 per square foot, you cannot say, oh, well, it's an 1,800 square foot house, so it must be 1,800 times 100. It's worth $180,000. I'm done. No. It doesn't work that way. Because, again, that did not take into account what? The value of the land. This $100 per square foot is meant to be an adjustment, assuming the land stays the same. So you can't just build it like little building blocks. It doesn't work that way. You'll see more what I mean when we get into the math of it. But what I'm telling you is, if I don't show you how to do it that way, and you ask me, can I do it this way, what do you think my answer is going to be? No. I'm showing you the only way it can be done. When it comes to making these adjustments, there is no shortcut. There's no end around, I don't like doing it that way. It has to be done my way, because it's the only way that works. Okay? Fair enough? So let's talk about the different approaches to value. Let's restart this. So there are 3 approaches to value, 3 appraisal methods, 3 ways to come up with a value for property. And the reason for that is it's really 3 categories of property. What did we say way back in the beginning of the class? The 3 main categories of property really are. Residential, stuff I buy because I want to do what? Live in it. What else? Income producing property, stuff I buy because I want to make money with it. And what? Special use. I heard somebody say commercial. Commercial falls under which one of those 3? Income producing. Does it have to be commercial for it to be income producing, though? No, anything can be income producing. If I bought it because I want to do what? Make money, then it's an income producing property. If I bought it because I wanted to live in it, it's a what? Residential property. If it's special use, it's special use. Well, look how many approaches to value there are. 1, 2, 3. Sales comparison approach. We use that if it's what kind of property? Residential. I bought it because I want to live in it. Just because it's a house doesn't mean it's residential. No, if I bought it to do what? Make money, it's a what kind of property? Income producing. And which way am I going to value it? With the income capitalization approach. Because any income producing property is valued based on the income it produces and no other factor. If I'm an investor and I'm buying a house and all I'm going to do with it is rent it out, I don't care if it has granite countertops or stainless steel appliances or hardwood floors. I care about what? How much can I rent it for? I care about the income, and that's all I care about. Now, if I'm buying it to live in, do I care about stainless steel appliances and granite countertops and hardwood floors? Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want you to get past this, oh, it's residential, oh, it's commercial, oh, it's... No. That's not what matters when we talk about valuation. What matters is what we're using it for, what the purpose of the property is. So the first of these is going to be the one that matters the most to you as a broker. And we're going to do a ton of these kinds of examples in class because they matter to you the most as a real estate broker, because this is the way we value what kind of property? Residential property and vacant land. This is the method for valuing residential property and vacant land. It's called the sales comparison approach. What's that first word? Sales. And the second word is what? So we are comparing it to things that have recently sold. Not are on the market. Not we think they want to ask this much for it. We are comparing our subject property, the thing that we want to come up with a value for. If Dennis comes up to me and says, what's my house worth? His house is the subject property because that's the house we're trying to value, right? And what would we do? We would look for other very similar homes to Dennis's that had recently done what? Sold. And the more similar, the better. So give me some examples of similar. What does similar mean? What makes it a good comparable property? What makes it more similar? What makes it better? So square footage size needs to be similar, but that's significantly down my list. It's the three most important words in real estate, folks. Location, location, location. So what makes it most similar? How close it is. How about same neighborhood? Would that not be first criteria? If it's in the neighborhood, same neighborhood would be a good place to start. Yes, similar size matters. What matters even more than that? Similar what? Style. Style matters more than size. I guess you could apply that to a lot of things, but we won't go there. But style matters. A ranch and a two-story, should you compare those houses? No. It's like comparing a minivan and a Ferrari. Doesn't work. They're only similar in that they're both houses. Because guess what? The buyers who buy them are not remotely similar. How many people that are shopping for ranches will settle for a two-story? Very few, because what led them to shop for ranches in the first place? They didn't want stairs. So the stairs are kind of a deal breaker for them. You cannot compare the two because, again, what's your job? If you're trying to come up with a value for a property, you come up with a prediction that what? Prediction of what? Probable sales price. Who's going to buy it? Make the connection. So what are you trying to predict? What a buyer will pay for it. Well, guess what? I can't predict what a buyer will pay for a ranch by looking at what buyers paid for a two-story because they're not the same what? Not the same style, but they're most importantly not the same buyers. It ain't even the same group of people, folks. I can't predict what a group of buyers who's not even interested in two-story houses will pay for a two-story by looking at a group of buyers who bought ranches. I can't do it. Does that make sense for you guys? Same neighborhood or not, they're not the same thing. You don't talk about the value of dogs by looking at cats. Because we know they would lose that competition every time, right? Cats would. Same neighborhood, if possible. And these are all if possible. There's no hard and fast rules here. Are you going to have to compromise on some of these things? Sure. The goal is to get the most similar. Sometimes the most similar is not very similar at all. That's the downside to the sales comparison approach. Is that there's not always good comps. Same neighborhood if possible. Same style if possible. Similar size, but there's no set rules for how much is too much. Similar features. As far as recently sold, the more recent, the better. Ideally within the last couple months. There's no such thing as too far back, though. Here's where people run into problems. They think too much, like everything else. If you're looking for comps, where are you going to be looking for them? As a real estate broker? In the MLS. You think the MLS might have, a way to like narrow things down and search for specific types of things? Here's how people run into problems doing CMAs. They're lazy searchers. How many of you are good Googlers? Like you're good at a Google search. You get what you want on the first time. See, I am. You know why? Because my Google searches are like 20 words long. Some of you, you're looking for comps, and here's your Google search. House. Not a very good search. You can't search the MLS. Well, you can search the MLS like that, but is that going to be a good result as far as comps go? If you're looking for comps and all you're doing is searching a neighborhood, everything that's sold in the neighborhood for the last 20 years, that is not a good way to look for comps. Here's the truth. There are good comps in that search, but the likelihood of you choosing them is very small because you've got to search through and filter through hundreds of them to get there. So instead of starting your search broad, how should you start your search? Really super narrow. Search for the same neighborhood sold in the last 60 days within 100 square feet plus or minus, same number of bedrooms, same number of bathrooms, same style. And guess what you might get? 0. That's okay. Because all you got to do now is start widening out your parameters. And as soon as you get 1, what do you know about that 1? Not only do you know it's a comp, you know it's a what? A good one. It's a good one. In fact, it's the best one you can possibly find. So start narrow and work your way out, not the other way around. I think people get frustrated when they see 0 results. That's not a bad thing. It just means you need to back up from there. I'd rather see 0 than 20. Because I'm not looking through 20. I don't have patience for that. If I see 20, you know what I'm doing? I'm going back to that search criteria, and what am I doing? I'm tightening it up. And people say, well, how do you tighten it up? Well, there's 100 different ways I can tighten it up. If I want 100 square feet plus or minus, couldn't I go to 50? Add more filters. If I looked at the last 60 days, couldn't I go to the last 30? Right? There are plenty of ways to tighten up those results. Yes. So a good number of comps is 3 to 5. 3 to 5. More than 5 is too many. Less than 3 is not ideal. Yes?
And the other question is there a place people can go to see what the common adjustments are for a particular location? Or is each broker got to come up with the $1,500 for a fireplace or $10,000 for a screening?
The unfortunate answer to that question is there is nowhere to go, no magic Bible to look at to say this is what the adjustments are. It comes from experience primarily. Until you have the experience, you have to rely on more experienced brokers, i.e. your broker in charge or an appraiser. Develop good relationships with appraisers. And you're going to be using them to do what for you anyway when you list your properties? Measure houses, right? See, there's a reason you hire them. Not only to take the liability off yourself, but when you use them and you develop a relationship with them and you're trying to do a CMA and you need to know what a fireplace is worth in a certain neighborhood, couldn't you shoot an email to that same appraiser and say, hey, I'm working on a CMA. How much should I adjust for a fireplace? There's a reason to develop those relationships. Okay? It's a good question. And this last panel over here on this slide is really important for test-taking purposes. Make sure you don't choose a comp that has special circumstances, especially on a test. They like to provide you, which of the following is the best possible comparable property. And sure as you're sitting there, they're going to have one that's almost identical. It's the same age, it's the same neighborhood, it's the same style, it's the same size, it's the same everything. But it was sold quickly because the seller had to move out of town. Well, guess what? That's not a good comp. Okay? Conditions of the sale matter a lot. Yes.
You can find that in the MLS?
Yeah, so in the MLS, we are required, it's a required field to fill in any special circumstances. So when we close out a transaction, if there was any kind of a special circumstance involved, we're supposed to put that in there so that other brokers and appraisers know to not use that as a comparable property. Unless, when would you, I've had people say, so should I never use something that's got special circumstances as a comparable? Well, no. You use it as a comparable when you have the same what? The same special circumstances. So if you were trying to come up with a value for a foreclosed property, what kinds of properties would you want to compare it to? Other ones that are foreclosed. It's when you're comparing different things that you don't want to use it. Yeah, if you're trying to value a short sale, by all means, please do use short sales as comps. Those are the best comps to use. Okay? Is that good for everybody?
You wouldn't know that unless you knew
The last part, that it was an arm's length transaction, that they were not selling to family or friends, you'd know. As a real estate broker, you'd know. Imagine presenting an offer to a seller, and you were presenting an offer that was from their cousin. You don't think they're going to mention that when you're going through that offer? You'd know. And again, where are you looking for comps? In the MLS. So the listing broker, if they knew that transaction was being sold to somebody with that kind of a relationship, they would put that information in there. Yep, they're required to include that for this specific reason, so that we don't have those kinds of things slip through. And that's another reason why people say, well, I don't want to just use the MLS, I want to use the tax records. This is the primary reason not to use the tax records as sources for comps, because you don't have any of that background information. The MLS has much more complete information about the transaction and what's going on. Because not just sales price, how about concessions? If the seller's paying some of the buyer's closing costs, isn't that something we probably need to know? Yeah. All of that matters. I'm sorry?
Would you deduct that off of the sales?
I deduct it from the sales price. If I had, if I saw something sold for $200,000 and the seller paid $5,000 in the buyer's closing costs, I'm using $195 as my sales price, because that's really what the buyer paid for the property. If the buyer's paying $200 and the seller's turning around paying $5,000 worth of the buyer's closing costs, the buyer's really paying $195. It's just a shell game with the money, right? So, yes, that matters. Adjustments. Adjustments are everything when we talk about the sales comparison approach. Now, when we get to adjustments, first of all, I want you to think about what you're doing. When you choose comparable properties, when you make that choice, you're choosing things that are as similar as possible to your subject property. But are you going to ever be able to find perfect matches? Probably not. If you can't find a perfect match, we have to use what's called an adjustment. The idea of an adjustment is to take something that's not a perfect match and turn it into what? A perfect match. So when we look at our subject property on one hand, and we look at a comparable property on another hand, the comparable property is either going to be the same for each feature, better, or worse. Now you notice my initial reaction is to hold my hands up. If you've watched the videos, you've already seen this. You will look stupid doing this. Get over it. Don't be self-conscious, because everybody else is going to be doing the same thing. I teach it this way because it works. The most common mistake, bar none, of the math in this chapter is to adjust in the wrong direction. And it is super easy to do it in the wrong direction, because you get caught up in the verbiage of it. They start using words like superior to and inferior to, or it's better than, or it's worse than. See, when they start doing that, you kind of get talked into going the wrong direction. If you use your hands, you can never go in the wrong direction. So, humor me. Hold up your hands just like this. In your left hand, which is this one right here, this one is your left, okay? In that hand is your subject property. This is your baby. This is what you're trying to value, right? It doesn't move. Imagine that you have some sort of a deformity. Something is wrong with your left arm. You've been in a terrible, gruesome accident, right? And it's stuck, just like this. It doesn't go down. It doesn't go up. Because guess what? The subject property never what? It never changes. This is not what we are adjusting. This is what we are adjusting to. We are always trying to take our comparable properties and make them similar to our subject, not the other way around. We don't adjust the subject, we adjust the comparable. The comparable's in your right hand. This is a floating platform here. It moves up and down. The goal is to make them what? The same. And some people say, make them the same for what? I say, for everything. If there's a difference, we want to adjust for that difference. Does that make sense? So if the square footage is different, if the subject property is 1,000 square feet, and the comparable property is 1,200 square feet, is 1,200 better than, the same, or worse? Where is it? It's better than, right? 1,000, 1,200. Now which one can I move? Which arm? The right. The comp. Make them equal. Which way do I have to go? Down. Because if this one won't move, the only way I can make them equal is to bring this one down. That is a negative adjustment. It's always going to be a negative adjustment because my comparable property is superior to my subject property. No matter what language they use, it doesn't matter. Here's another trick. They're dirty about this. They will say things like, the subject property is better than the comparable property by $1,000. That is meaningless language because the subject property can't be better than the comparable property because the subject property is what the subject property is. You have to change that language and think about everything from the standpoint of the comp. So, if we say that the subject property is better than the comp, you have to switch that language around and say the comparable property is what? Worse than the subject, because it's the comparable that you're going to be adjusting. Does that make sense for everybody? So if they say subject property is better than the comparable property, I immediately write down comparable worse, because that tells me which way I need to adjust. Up. I need to bring the comparable up to the level of the subject. Does that make sense so far for everybody? So that's the art of making adjustments. We always adjust the comparable, never the subject. And they're designed to make the properties more equal. Well, obviously, I can't add a half bathroom to a comparable property. So what would I have to add? The value of a half bath. The value of, and how do I find the value of a half bath? Well, on a test, they would hopefully give it to me. But in a real world, what would you look for? How would you find the value of a half bath in the real world? Say that again. Look for, and compare it to something that didn't have a what? A half bath. She's on to something. You find two houses. One that does have a half bath, and one that what? Doesn't have a half bath. And if that's the only difference between the two, then whatever the difference in price is the value of half bath. Now see, I make that sound silly, but guess what, guys? There are math questions exactly like that. And you'll sit there and stare at them like it's Latin. It ain't. If there are two houses, and they're exactly the same, except for a half bath, and the one with the half bath sold for $5,000 more than the one without the half bath, guess what a half bath is worth? $5,000. It works exactly that way. Okay? The other thing to remember when you're making adjustments, to adjust, you have to have something to adjust from. The question is, what am I adjusting? Here's what you're adjusting. What the comp sold for. Remember, when we chose our comps, these were recently what properties? sold properties. So the selling price of the comp is your starting point for your adjustments. That's your starting point. When you start adding and subtracting, you're adding to that sales price or subtracting from that sales price. All right? If the comparable property is better than the subject property, you adjust the sales price of the comp down. Subject property is here, comp is up here, adjust down. If the comparable property is worse than the subject property, you adjust up. You add value up to make them even. It says, in attempting to value the property at 123 Main Street in Garner, Diane finds a very similar comparable property that sold for $150,000 last month. The home at 123 Main Street has 3 full baths, but the comparable property only has 2. Full baths in the area are valued at $8,000 each. Based on this information, what's the indicated value of the subject property? In this case, the comp is what? Better or worse? Worse. Why is it worse? Because the subject, which is 123 Main Street, has how many full baths? 3. The comp has how many full baths? 2. It's worse, correct? So which way are we going to adjust? Up. We have to bring the value of the comp up by the value of a full bath. And how much does it tell us a full bath is worth? $8,000. So that adjustment is going to be up by $8,000. Well, we start from what the comp sold for, which was how much? $150 plus the $8,000 adjustment for the bath gives us an indicated value or probable sales price of what? $158,000. That's how you apply an adjustment. It doesn't get more complex, it just gets longer. Because we're probably not just going to be adjusting for bathrooms, we're probably going to adjust for bathrooms and garages and square feet, and hardwood floors and kitchen upgrades and all those kinds of things. But the adjustments work exactly the same. It's just a matter of doing the same process over and over and over for each individual adjustment. We good with that? All right. Square footage adjustments. They're made with $1 per square foot adjustment. Do the same process as far as up or down. If the subject property is 1,200 square feet and the comp is 1,300 square feet, which way do I have to adjust? Down by how many square feet? 100 square feet. And then I just need to know what an adjustment per square foot would be to come up with the amount of that adjustment. Okay? So here's an example of that. It says I'm doing a CMA at 402 Oak Drive. And I find a recently sold comparable property that has 1,950 square feet of living area and sold for $287,000. Finished living area is valued at $110 a square foot in the area. We measure the subject property and find it has 1,800 square feet of living area. What would the sales price for 402 Oak probably be? Okay, so what I always do with these is to make myself a chart. I have a subject property and I have a comparable property. And sometimes I have multiple comparables. In the real world, how many comparables am I going to have? 3 to 5. And then I just start talking about the things I'm going to make an adjustment for. In this case, my only adjustment is going to be for size. How many square feet did they tell me my subject property was? 1,800 for my subject property, right? And my comparable is how many? 1,950. Now, what is the starting point for my comparable? What did it sell for? $287,000. I put that at the top because that's my starting point. Does everybody see the basics of how I've set this up? So what do you think I'm going to do from here down? Everything's going to be a what? A plus or a minus for my adjustments. So in this case, let's just talk about the direction of the adjustment before I do the math. My subject is 1800. My comp is 1950, so it's better, correct? Which way do I have to adjust to make them even? Down. That is going to be a negative adjustment. So I'm going to write that down even before I do the math, just to make sure I go in the correct direction. It's a negative adjustment. And how many square feet am I adjusting for? 150. I need to go down by 150 square feet. Times how much per square foot? $110. So if I do the math there, what's my adjustment? A negative what? 16,500. So minus 16,500. What was my starting point? 287. So 287 minus 16,500. What's going to be my indicated value for my probable sales price for my subject property? 270 what? 270,500. Is everybody okay with where that number would come from? That's with just one adjustment. If we had multiple adjustments, what would we do? Just keep going, right? Just keep comparing, side by side. Bedrooms, bathrooms, garages. Okay? So, bathrooms and garages need a special discussion. And I know you're going to want to throw stuff at me, but you've got to do it this way. A half bath is not half of a full bathroom. It's just not. Think of a full bathroom. What do you find in a full bathroom? Shower or tub, some kind of bathing apparatus, right? A sink and a toilet. Is everybody with me on that? That's a full bath. What's a half bath? Sink and a toilet, right? Okay, so let's talk about a very common adjustment. Just bear with me for a second. Common adjustment. This is why I'm going to show you why you can't do it the way you want to do it. Subject property has 2.5 baths. Comparable has 3 baths. I need to adjust, correct? And I need to adjust what? Down. Now what you would tell me is I need to adjust down by what? Half a bath. Let's think about that for a second. So what you're telling me I need to do is take this 3-bathroom house, and I need to somehow remove a sink and a toilet from it, right? Is that a 2.5 bath house now? No, it's a house with 2 full baths and 1 really funky room that has nothing but a shower. Doesn't work. Can't do it that way. So what I'm telling you is you can't do it all as one step. It's a 2-step adjustment, because full baths are one category and half baths are a separate category. You have to remove the full and then add the half. It's 2 steps. So start breaking them out and treating them as 2 separate things. And what I mean by that is, in this example, you would first adjust the full baths and then you would adjust the half baths. So when you write that down, let me switch over here. When you write that down, if you're making your little chart here and you say subject and comp, I'm not going to write down that my subject is 2.5 baths. What I'm going to write is full baths, 2. And the comp has 3. Half baths, 1. And the comp has 0. That's what that looks like. You don't write 2.5 and 3. You write 2 fulls, 3 fulls. but then you come down here a different line for half baths and you write 1/2 in the subject, 0 half baths in the comp. Because when you split it out that way and you write it that way, you see what I mean by it needs to be 2 adjustments, right? Does that make sense? When you write it this way, when you kind of expand it out, you see that there's 2 things that need to be adjusted, because we need to adjust first what? Full baths, and then we need to adjust half baths. Garages, exactly the same way. A 1-car garage is not half of a 2-car garage. So when you see that you need to make an adjustment between 1-car and 2-car garages, what you need to write is 1-car garages and 2-car garages. So in the case of, let's say my subject has a 1-car garage and the comp has a 2-car garage. This is what that looks like when I write it down. The subject has a 1-car garage. That's 1. How many 1-car garages does the comp have? 0. 2-car garages. How many does the subject have? 0. How many does the comp have? 1. Now do you see how that's a 2-step adjustment as well? Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, so you have to expand out those. And I think we've got an example of that on the next slide. Oops, I don't actually. But we'll see plenty of examples of it. The last thing we might need to make an adjustment for is appreciation or depreciation. Most commonly on a test they use appreciation. I've never seen a test question with depreciation in a CMA. But if they did, the math would be exactly the same. Appreciation or depreciation happen because your comps, even though they're similar and even though they're recently sold, they didn't just sell today. They almost always sold some time ago. And if the market is changing, like for example in the Raleigh market right now, what's happening in the market? Things are what? Things are doing what? They're going up. They're selling quickly, and values are doing what? They're going up. They are appreciating. What that means is that even if I'm looking at a comp that's 4 months old, if it sold today instead of 4 months ago, what would it likely sell for? Higher price. I need to adjust for that in my CMA. I need to make that as an adjustment in my CMA. So when I'm doing an adjustment for appreciation, what I'm really trying to do is adjust for how much it would sell for today versus however many months ago it sold. Now, when you do this, you're going to be far better off if you don't take shortcuts. There's a temptation here. When you see something that sold 6 months ago, there's a temptation to figure out the annual appreciation and divide it by what? 2 in half, because you know that 6 months is half of a year. I would challenge you not to do it that way, because if you do it that way and you get one that says 5 months, you're not going to know what the heck to do. If you will take the long route, which is to figure the annual appreciation and divide that by what? 12, and then multiply by the number of months, it will never fail you. So, here's an example. I'm sorry? You can't see it on the slide? Why not? Gosh. Gosh, I swear. Y'all are so needy sometimes. You want to see stuff? So I'll give you a chance to write it down if you would like. It says a comp sold 7 months ago. What are you going to do if a test is like that? I mean, you going to complain then? Or 0. One of the two, right? A comp sold 7 months ago for $280,000 in a neighborhood that has been appreciating at a rate of 4% annually. Here's the thing though. It didn't sell a year ago, right? So it would not have appreciated the full 4%. So what does that tell you we're going to have to do? We're going to have to break this thing down to a smaller amount of time, specifically monthly. What's the adjusted value of the comparable property? Well, the way you do an appreciation adjustment, I'm talking slow so you have time to write. The way you do an appreciation adjustment is to take whatever the comp sold for. Now, here's an important thing to remember. When you start doing CMAs, don't do all of your other adjustments first. Don't do your square footage and then your bathrooms and your garages and your updates. Don't take those adjustments first and then do your appreciation. Because your appreciation is based on your sales price, not your adjusted sales price. Does everybody understand what I just said? So, don't do your other adjustments first. What's going to be the first one you do? Your appreciation or depreciation, because you don't want to use the adjusted sales price. You want to use the raw sales price. So in this case, we don't have to worry about that because we don't have any other adjustments. The only thing we have is the appreciation. So we're going to take that $280,000 sales price, and we're going to multiply it times the 4% annual appreciation. That means if it had sold a full year ago, it would have gone up in value by how much money? $11,200. Did it sell a full year ago, though? No, it only sold how far back? 7 months. So what we have to do with that $11,200 is divide it by 12 to get annual appreciation. Monthly appreciation, to break the annual down into monthly. So that's $933 a month times 7 months, because it sold 7 months ago. So we've got total appreciation since that sale of $6,533.31. That means if it sold today, it wouldn't sell for $280,000. It would sell for how much? $286,533 and change. That's an appreciation adjustment. And appreciation, is that going to be a plus or a minus? Plus. If it was depreciation, it would be a minus. All right? So just a final note here before we start doing some practice on these. When you're doing a CMA, you should have 3 to 5 comps. Each one of those is going to give you an indicated value. So each one's going to give you a separate value. If you have 3 comps, you're going to have 3 different numbers, right? They're not going to be the same in a real world CMA. Don't average them together. This is important for test taking purposes. You are not smart enough to come up with an exact number. To do that, you have to be an appraiser. We come up with what's called a range of values. Well, if you've got 3 comps, guess what your range is going to be? From the lowest to the highest. Once you've come up with those adjusted numbers, you can't go any further. You simply say your property is probably going to sell for somewhere between here and here. Lowest to highest. Does everybody follow that? We good with that idea? Okay. We ready to work on some of these? Let's do some math. I know that's what you were waiting for. I could feel it. All right. So go over to the valuation math exercises that I handed out earlier. And number 1, what's the correct adjustment to be made to the value of an 1,800 square foot? Let's see if I can widen this pen out a little bit. There we go. of an 1,800 square foot comparable property which sold in an area where living area is valued at $110 per square foot if it's being compared to a subject property which is 1,700 square feet. So we'll make my little chart. Subject, comp. Wow, that's a thick pen. You can see that. Well, the only thing we're adjusting for is size here. Okay? How big is my subject?
180. No, the subject.
Subject is 1,700 square feet. And the comparable is 1,800 square feet. Okay? And they want to know what the correct adjustment is going to be. Well, an adjustment always has a positive or negative before it, because we got to know, are we adding the money or are we subtracting the money? Subject is 1,700. Comp is up here at 1,800. So which way am I adjusting? Down. So it's going to be a negative adjustment. My final answer is going to be a negative number. And it's going to be minus the value of how many square feet? How many do I need to adjust for? 100 square feet times $110 per square foot. So it's like $11,000 to me, right? So the adjustment is going to be minus $11,000. Everybody good with that? All right. Number 2. What's the indicated value of 123 Main Street, which has 2,300 square feet, 2.5 baths, and a 2-car garage, if it's compared with 989 Oak Drive, which is 2,300 square feet, 3 baths, and a 2-car garage, and sold for $320,000 in an area, and then they give me my adjustments. So what I'm going to do is break the property down. I'm going to make my 2 charts. Subject, comp. And the first thing it looks like I'm going to be adjusting for is size. All right. What do I know about my subject? How big is it?
2,300.
Subject is 2,300 square feet. And the comp is 2,300 square feet. All right. Also, I need to adjust for baths, correct? So full baths and half. What do I have on my subject as far as full baths goes? 2. And how many does the comp have? 3. Half baths on my subject. 1. How many on my comp? 0. All right. And it looks like the garages are the same, so I'm not going to have to make an adjustment there, right? I mean, if I was doing a garage adjustment, I would do 1-car and 2-car garages, but they both have a 2-car, so that's not going to, does everybody see that's the same, so I don't need to adjust? We good with that? Okay? So, if I take a look at this, I don't need to make an adjustment for size. Now, I'm starting at $320,000. That's my starting point up here at the top. I don't need to make an adjustment for size, so that's going to be a 0. For full baths, my subject's at 2, my comp's at 3. Which way am I adjusting? Down. I'm adjusting down, and it's going to be minus the value of a full bath. So minus how much money? $9,000. They tell me that a full bath's worth $9,000, so that's what I'm subtracting. Now for half baths, my subject's at 1, my comp is at 0. Which way am I adjusting? Up by the value of a half bath, so that's going to be up what? $5,000. And if I take those adjustments, what is 320 minus 9 plus 5? 316? So my probable sales price or indicated value is $316,000. Everybody okay with that one? Number 3 should be pretty simple for you at this point in time. It says a comparable property is 125 square feet smaller than the subject. at $40 per square foot, what adjustment should be made? Well, here's the subject. And somebody says, well, I don't even know how big the subject is. Does that matter? No, because what matters is what the comp is relative to it, right? And the comp is what? 125 square feet smaller, so it needs to go what? Up. I need to adjust the comp up, so it's going to be plus 125 times $40 per square foot. How much is that? $5,000? So plus $5,000 is going to be my adjustment. A prospective seller has asked a broker to help him estimate a reasonable selling price for his property. Properties in the local market are appreciating at a rate of 2% per year. Using the sales comparison approach to value and using just one comparable property that sold for $187,200 7 months ago, what adjustment should the broker make to account for appreciation? So appreciation, first of all, is that going to be a plus or a negative? Plus. So we know it's going to be plus something, so we just write that down so we don't forget. We're going to be up, adjusting up. So we're starting at $187,200 and multiplying times 2%, because that would be full annual appreciation. How much is that? $37.44. And if I divide that by 12, what would that be monthly? $312 per month. And how many months have we done that for? 312 times 7. So that's going to be plus what? $21.84. So plus $21.84 is our appreciation adjustment. Go ahead and work on number 5 on your own. You do the appreciation first before you make adjustments. No, sir. No. All right, so you got your appreciation. All right. Why would you subtract $1,000 there? Show me with your hands the subject is better by $1,000. Show me with your hands.
Oh. So I should switched it up.
Subject's right here, right? If the subject's better by 1,000, where's the comp?
Oops. Oh. So
Good. 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 What you got? Nothing yet? You shouldn't have anything under that column. Remember, make everything about the comp. So take what they gave you and make it about the comp. How you doing? Calm down. It ain't that bad. Appreciation, you have to add it.
Right, to 70 and
Mhm.
everything else underneath that.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's not like months ago.
What? I love it. Perfect. Yes. What you got? You got some. You're going in the wrong direction on some of these. You're going in the wrong direction on some of them. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to step on your foot.
I'm gonna disregard this, but so if it goes up by 2%, that's 1,400.
Yeah.
So you would add the 70,000 with the 1,400.
Yeah.
And then subtract 1,000.
Well, I have to look at the other adjustments. All right. So why are you subtracting the thing?
Because the subject was better.
Subject. I don't understand that language. See, this is where hard-headedness will get you wrong on these questions. It is. I mean, I only say that because I've seen it so many times. I don't say that because I'm trying to be a hard ass about it. I say that because I've seen it so many times. Remember earlier on I said it is meaningless to say the subject is. I don't care what the subject is. I care what the what is. The comp. You have to change these statements into the comp is. You have to, because it's the only way you're going to figure out, because what are you adjusting? You're adjusting the comp. You can't adjust the subject. So statements that the subject is better mean nothing. So what did I do first? If it said, well, the first thing I did was appreciation. Did everybody get $1,400 for appreciation? Okay? And that's a plus, correct? The next thing, location. What did it tell us about location? The subject is what? Better by $1,000. So what did I do with that? Look what I wrote down. Look what I wrote in the comp. First of all, notice what I have in the subjects column. Absolutely nothing, because that doesn't matter. What matters is over here, because this is where the adjustments happen. So if the subject is better by 1,000, what did I immediately write down? I wrote that the comp was worse by 1,000, because it's just flip it around, right? I got to phrase it in terms of the comp. And in that case, the comp is worse by 1,000. Well, if the comp is worse by 1,000, doesn't it become very clear which way your adjustment is going? What is it? Plus 1,000. And on that second one, it said the subject was worse by $500 for site features. So it was better by $500 for site features. So I changed that around to what? Comp is worse by 500. So it becomes very clear which way I need to adjust, doesn't it? And what is that? plus 500. Does that make sense for everybody? Now the other two were easier because it phrased it in terms of the comp. It says in size the comp was better by $1,600. Subject, comp is what? Where's the comp? Better. So which way do I need to adjust to make them even? Down. Those of you that are sitting out there looking at me going, oh, I can do it without moving my hands. No, you can't. I promise you, you can't. You can't do it. I am not a motivational speaker when I'm up here. I'm not saying you can do it. You can't, because I've seen it too many times. It's so easy to go the wrong way, and you're going to be wrong, and they're going to have that as an answer choice because they know what you do. They sit there evil. I told you this. They sit there and they try to figure out what's the most common mistake, and they duplicate it, and they give it to you as an answer choice. I'm trying to teach you how to avoid those mistakes. I know this hand thing is stupid. If anybody ever saw me doing it outside of here, they'd be like, what's wrong with that guy? But in here, it works. It really does. Okay? So if you make all those adjustments, I come up with a value of $70,500. And don't worry if you didn't get this first time out. It's confusing. It is confusing. And it takes a while to get it. That's why we do plenty of practice with it. $70,500. All right? Let's work on number 6. And I'll be right back and we'll do it together. Okay, let's take a look at this number 6. All right, so I'm again just going to set up my comparison chart here. And what they told me is that the subject is 1,950 square feet. A highly similar house in the same neighborhood has 2,100 square feet. Recently sold for $90 per square foot plus $30,000 for the lot. So they kind of gave me the starting point in a weird format here. They said it sold for $90 plus $90 a square foot plus $30,000 for the lot. So I need to figure out what the starting point is here. What is going to be the sales price of my comparable property? So if I can get to a calculator here. If I take $90 per square foot times how many square feet? 2,100. So 2,100 times 90 equals $189,000 plus what? $30,000 for the lot. So 219 is my starting point for my comparable property. Is everybody okay on where that number came from? Good on that? That's what the comp sold for. All right, the subject lot is worth $4,000 more than the comparables lot. So as far as lot size goes, the subject's lot is worth $4,000 more. I can't deal in that language. Switch it around. The comparables lot is worth what? Worth $4,000 less. Okay? So how would I make an adjustment for that? If the subject is here and the comp is worth $4,000 less, what's that going to be? A positive adjustment. I've got to put it in language of the comp. You cannot sit there and read the subject is worth blah, 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 blah. Stop. Just stop yourself. Stop that runaway freight train in your head. I can't deal with the subject. I have to deal with what? The comp, because that's what I'm adjusting. So I've got to flip it around into comp language. And comp language is the comp is worth $4,000 less, so that's going to be plus $4,000. Okay? And the subject has a deck worth $3,000 that the comp does not have. So if I just write down deck, I can say Subject, yes. Comp, no. Well, subject has a deck. Comp does not. Which way am I adjusting? Up by the value of the deck. And how much is that? So that's plus $3,000. Based only on those factors, what's the indicated value? So it's going to be 219. But I have not adjusted for my square footage. Sorry, we forgot that one up at the top. So the subject has 1,950 square feet. The comp has 2,100. What kind of an adjustment is that going to be? Down by 150 square feet. And it's worth how much per square foot? $90. So what's 150 square feet at $90 per square foot? So minus 13,500. So I've got 219 minus 13,500 plus 4,000 plus 3,000. So 219 minus 6,500, 212,500. Is that right? $212,500. As you can see, there's nothing hard about the math. What's hard is training your brain to only focus on it from the standpoint of the comparable and then getting the adjustment in the correct direction. The pluses and minuses are pretty easy. I mean, that's just addition and subtraction. Okay? All right. Let's take a break, and then we will come back and we'll look at, and you can work on number 7 when you come back. Okay, says the 2-story house is 7 years old and has vinyl siding. And I'm just writing everything down. I know some of these things we aren't going to make adjustments for. I'm just writing everything down to kind of keep myself headed in the right direction. 2,450 square feet, so the size is 2,450. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. Beds, 3 full baths, 2 half bath, 1 a 1-car attached garage. So 1-car garages. It has 1, 2-car. It has 0. Bonus room over the garage. Bonus. Yes. Okay. And recent kitchen and bath upgrades. I'm just going to put yes. Okay. Recent kitchen and bath upgrades. So as far as my comparable property, they found a similar house, 2-story with vinyl siding. So that's still the same vinyl siding. That sold 6 months ago. So we'll just write that down, 6 months ago, for $253,000. $253,000. That's going to be our starting point. That house is 8 years old. Okay. 2,600 square feet. 3 bedrooms. 2.5 baths. A 2-car garage. So it's got 0 1-car and 1 2-car. No significant upgrades. It didn't tell us anything about the bonus, but it has no significant upgrades. And then they give us the adjustment amounts. Okay, so the one other thing we're going to have to adjust for is appreciation. So now we're ready to start comparing. Notice I haven't done any math. If you're trying to do math before you get them lined up beside each other, you're going to miss something. The best thing to do is just detail out the information, make your chart, so then when you start making your comparisons, you can just bust right on through them. Okay? So when we start comparing age, there is a difference. But the problem is they didn't give us what? Any adjustment for it. So what can we do with it? Nothing. No adjustment. Vinyl and vinyl are the same, so that's no adjustment. I got it down here at the bottom. You want to do it first? We can do it first if you want to. It doesn't. I'm sorry? You were thinking the adjustment with, oh, not the age of the house. Appreciation doesn't have anything to do with the age of the house. Appreciation has to do with time since it's sold. Okay? So appreciation doesn't have anything to do. I'm glad I got clarification there. Appreciation doesn't have anything to do with the age of the house. Okay? In this case, just the time since the comparable sold. Okay? So size. Do we need to make an adjustment for size? Yes. Subject's 2450, comp is 2600. Which way are we going? Down. So down by 150 square feet. And what they told us was that square footage was worth what? 110. So what's 150 worth? 16.5. So minus $16,500. Beds, do we need to make an adjustment? Nope. Full baths, do we need to make an adjustment? Half baths? Nope. One car garages? Yes. Subject has a one car garage, comp does not. What do we need to do? Well, we need to add the value of a one car, so that's plus what? 10,000. And then we need to go to the two car. The subject does not have one, the comp does, so we need to subtract the value of a two car. Is going to be minus what? Minus 15,000. They didn't tell us anything just for bonus rooms, so we couldn't do anything with that. But they did tell us what the upgrades were worth. The subject is upgraded, the comp is not. And how much were the upgrades valued at? 20,000. So is that going to be plus or minus 20,000? Plus. We need to adjust up. So that's plus $20,000 in upgrades. And then finally, our appreciation. Is this price appreciation in the area has been about 5% during the past year. But it didn't sell a year ago. How long ago did it sell? 6 months. So to do my appreciation, I need to come down here and take my sales price of my comp, which was $253,000. Now notice I'm not doing the adjustments first. I'm just using that 253, the unadjusted number, times 5%. How much is that? 12,650. So 12,650, and if you divide that by 12, 10.54 and 17 cents monthly, times how many months? 6 months. So what is that? $6,325. So my appreciation is going to be plus 63.25. Is that good for everybody? And that's the last adjustment. So if we start from the 253 and subtract 16,500 and then add 10,000 and then subtract 15,000, what do we end up with? We go through plus 20,000 on the upgrades, plus 6,300 on the appreciation. What do we come up with? 257,825, but they ask us for rounded to the nearest $1,000, so that's going to be $258,000. How are we doing on these? Okay? You're definitely going to see these on the test. No question about it. All right, number 8 and 9 are a little bit different. Let's look at number 8. It says if a 1,400 square foot home sells for $165,000 and a 1,500 square foot home with similar features in the same neighborhood sells for $175,000, what is the value of finished living area per square foot in this neighborhood? Well, if the only difference between these two houses is square footage, then the difference in price is the difference in the value of the square footage. Does that make sense for you guys? In other words, What's the difference in price on these two homes? $10,000. And what were the buyers paying for with that additional $10,000? An additional what? 100 square feet. So couldn't we just divide 10,000 by 100 to figure out what the value of each square foot is in that neighborhood? $10,000 divided by 100 equals $100 per square foot. Everybody okay with that? Then look at number 9. Number 9 says, based on the information shown below for the subject property and 3 recently sold comparable properties, what's the appropriate estimate of value for the subject? Well, what's the problem here? What do they not give us? Adjustments. Think of the other CMA problems we've done. What did they have to tell us? Well, I can't adjust for square footage if you don't give me a dollar per square foot. Isn't that the immediate problem here? If that's not what jumps out at you, then you didn't understand what we've been working on for the last half hour. Because you can't do a CMA without adjustment numbers. They had to tell us those. Well, in this question, they didn't tell us those. But they did give us enough information to do what with them?
Take away the rest.
To come up with the adjustments. We've got enough info here to come up with the adjustments. Do me a favor. Look at sale number 1 and sale number 2. Are they relatively similar? In fact, they're pretty dang similar, aren't they? Same size, same number of bedrooms. What's the only difference between them? A bathroom. And is there a difference in sales price for the two of them? What is that one bathroom worth? That bath is valued at $10,000. Because the house with 2 baths sold for $10,000 more than the house with 1 bath. Does that make sense for everybody? What other thing can you see that we're going to need to make adjustments for in this CMA? When you look at the subject and you compare it across the line, if you look at the subject, 1,200 square feet, we're going to need to make it a square footage adjustment, right? Because we got 1,300, 1,300, 1,100, so we're going to need a square footage adjustment. Can you see 2 comparable properties that are exactly the same other than square footage? Number 1 and number 3. The only difference there is square footage, correct? How many square feet is it different? 200 square feet. And how much money was that worth? $8,000. So if we divide 8,000 by 200, what do we get? 1 square foot is worth 40 bucks. Does everybody see where that number comes from? Now, once you have those, you have the adjustment numbers you need to do the CMA. Then it just becomes a CMA like any other. You go to your subject property and you start comparing. So, just looking at comp 1. Let's do that one first. Square feet. My subject is how many? 1,200. And what is the comparable property? How big is it? 13. Is that better or worse? Where am I? It's better, so which way am I adjusting? Down. By how many square feet? 100 at how much per square foot? $40, which is a $4,000 adjustment. So I'm down by $4,000. Everybody okay with that adjustment? We good? Bedrooms, 2 and 2. Do we need to make an adjustment there? No. Baths, do we need to make an adjustment? No. No. So the only adjustment we've got is that minus $4,000, which means for comp number 1, I come up with 116. That's the 120 it sold for minus the $4,000 adjustment. That's 116. Well, let's look at comp 2. Do we need to make a square footage adjustment? Which way? Down by $4,000 because it's down by the same 100 square feet as comp 1. Bedrooms, do we need an adjustment? 2 and 2, no adjustment. Bathrooms, do we need an adjustment? Subject has 2, comp has 1, which way are we going? Up by the value of a bath, which is plus $10,000. So if I take 110,000 minus 4,000 plus 10, what do I come up with? 116,000. You see a trend here? Hopefully you do. Comp 3, do I need to make an adjustment for square footage?
Yes.
Which way is it going to be? Up. I need to add 100 square feet. And how much is 100 square feet worth? So plus 4,000 this time. I don't need to make an adjustment for bedrooms. I don't need to make an adjustment for bathrooms. And voila, $116,000. That looks an awful lot like answer choice B to me.
Do you have to do all of them, or could you just do one?
Well, it's a good question. Sarah's question is, do you have to do all of them or can you just do one? Depends on how confident you are. I mean, when you're doing one of these where you have to come up with the adjustments, they should all 3 be the same number. If you're really super confident that you know what you're doing, just do one. But, you know, if you do all 3 and you get different numbers, excuse me, then somewhere along the way you've gone astray. So it's kind of a way of checking yourself. Are we good with that one? All right. And then last one. I'll let you do this one on your own and then we'll come back and do it together. And it'll be the last one for the CMA stuff, for the sales comparison approach. I just have to. I got to check behind myself. We got all the same adjustments. Oh, I know what I probably did. I know what I did. Same. Sold 6 months ago. That's 1 month worth of appreciation. And appreciation should be a plus, not a minus. Yep. 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 Seem to be. Oh. You did that right. That's right. Maybe you did. Because I'm looking at I don't see anything that stands out as wrong. Okay. All right. I'm looking. I didn't see anything wrong with it, except the final answer. So to the nearest thousand is going to be 320. Good. 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 All right. Let's take a look. I know I haven't glanced at everybody's yet, but I think everybody's ready to go over it. So. All right. So. You set it up in your 2 columns. The first thing that I see I needed to adjust for was square footage. And the subject was 2,800. The comp was 2,750. So I needed to adjust up by 50 square feet, which was plus 5,750. Everybody get that adjustment for the square footage? The next thing that needed an adjustment was the half bath. And I needed to add the value of a half bath. So that's plus $6,000. I think I saw everybody going in the correct direction on that. I think everybody went in the correct direction on the upgrades. If the subject does not have any upgrades and the comp is upgraded, I need to adjust down. So that's minus $18,000 for the upgrades. And then the appreciation, I came down here and figured out my annual appreciation is $3,250, which breaks down to a monthly of $270.83. So half the year, 6 months worth was plus $1,625. which gave me $320,000 when I did added up all the adjustments. $320,375, and to the nearest thousand is $320,000. If you can handle that, you can handle a CMA question on the test, because they don't get any more and if you notice, they're not complex. There's just a bunch of little things. You got a bunch of steps. You have to make sure you don't miss anything. That's why I don't go through and try to pick out the things I'm going to have to adjust for. I just kind of list everything and put them side by side and then see what I have to adjust for. It's easy to miss something along the way. Okay?
There'd be nothing.
Yes.
There wouldn't be anything that they would throw in there that we wouldn't include. That would be like a, you know how they throw in fluff in other questions?
Yeah, in these questions, they really don't throw any fluff in there. I mean, except like the age. You know, like they said, the age of, you know, the subject was 12 years old and the comp was 11 years old. But if they don't give you a number to adjust with it, there's just nothing you can do. So that's kind of the fluff they do give you in these questions. Okay? Good enough? That is the sales comparison approach to value. So going back to our slides here, I know it's been a while since we were there, but head back over. With the sales comparison approach, remember, we use that to value what kind of properties? Residential and vacant land. Don't forget, land also falls into that category with the sales comparison approach. Residential and vacant land. We got 2 more to go. Now, luckily for you guys, the other 2 aren't as in-depth of a conversation. And there's a reason for that. As a real estate broker, what area of real estate are you likely to practice in? Residential. So that's going to be a very real-world math that we just went through. So they're going to give you more examples of that. But you will get math of every type in this class, in this chapter. So you have to know also how to do the math of the income approach and the cost approach. So we're going to go through those as well. So let's talk about the cost approach. And this is, in my opinion, the easiest of the 3 to deal with. I think the math is the easiest here. There's fewer moving pieces. But before we get to the math of it, let's talk about a few little pieces of theory. So picking back up with the cost approach, which in your book is on page, give you a page here, 486, if you want to. So the cost approach is used primarily for special use properties. Properties that we don't buy because we want to live in them, and we don't buy them to make money. If they don't fit either one of those categories, then they fall into this special use category. And realistically, there's not much of a reason to value these things in the first place. Why do we normally value things when we're trying to do what with them? Sell them. Well, guess what? Special use properties we don't really sell. I mean, when was the last time you saw a public school on the market? Or a library, or a fire department? It just doesn't happen. So we're not even valuing them for the purpose of selling them. Is there another reason we have to have values for pieces of real property? Insurance. Insurance. We need an insurance value. Somebody said taxes, and that would be a good idea, except most of these also fall into what? Tax exempt status. So we don't even value them for that purpose. But we do need insurance values. If that church burns down, don't we need to have an insurance value on the building? If a tornado tears down the library, we need to have an insurance policy that's going to take care of that. So we're valuing things for insurance purposes largely with the cost approach. It's broken down into 3 steps, 3 very straightforward steps. The cost approach can be broken down into 3 really straightforward steps. First, you value the land as if it is vacant. So we want the vacant land value. Okay, is everybody good with that? Vacant land value. And in the question, they almost always will just give it to you. They'll just say the land is valued at this. They could possibly tell you the land is valued at $1.50 per square foot, and it's 2 acres, and you might have to do some acreage math. But most of the time, they're just going to straight up just give you the land value, and so you don't have to do any math to get that. You just write it down. Land value, boom, step 1, done. Yes, great. You would look for other similar pieces of property that were zoned similarly, that were in similar areas, and what they had sold for per square foot, and come up with a land value that way.
Now, that doesn't sell through the MLS, correct?
It does in some cases.
Oh, okay.
It does in some cases, but yeah, you'd have to look more at tax records for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you,
Okay? So, step 1, value the land. Step 2, we want to add what's called the replacement cost of the structure. Think of these buildings as just shells, right? If they're special use properties, really, their only usefulness is in what they're used for. They're just a shell. So we just value them on a dollar per square foot basis. We just say, well, it's going to cost us, and in this case, we do care what it costs us, because if for insurance purposes, that's the only thing that matters, is how much it costs to replace it. Does that make sense for everybody? So we look at the replacement cost of the structure. If it's going to cost $80 per square foot and it's 5,000 square feet, we would just multiply those two numbers and say that's the replacement cost of the building. So step 1, value the land. Step 2, add the replacement cost of the building. Is everybody with me so far? And then step 3, it says subtract the depreciation of the structure. Subtract the depreciation of the structure. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. We're going to talk about depreciation. Now, in the sales comparison approach, we talked about appreciation and depreciation being related to the time since it's sold. Because we don't think of houses as depreciating in value just because they age. We just don't think of them that way. We think of appreciation and depreciation in the housing market being based on the market itself. But when you talk about a special use property, they never appreciate. What do they always do? Depreciate, because what we think, with the way we view them, is that they have a limited lifespan. They have a limited time that they're going to be useful, and that starts to decline from day one. They're just like people. The day you're born, you start dying type thing. That's the same idea here. Like somebody told me one time, you may not be very good today, but it's the best you're going to ever be, so you better make the best of it, right? And that's pretty true. So we talk about this difference between replacement cost or reproduction cost, and it's on page 487 in your book. Bluntly, they give you way more information here than I think you need. What you need to know is that reproduction cost is much more expensive than replacement cost, and therefore it's very rarely used. Replacement means it's a 4,000 square foot building, so we're giving you a 4,000 square foot building. Maybe it's not exactly the building you had before, but it's something close. Reproduction means we're rebuilding it brick by brick exactly as it was before. What kind of properties do you think you would have an insurance policy that would include a reproduction cost? Historic properties, absolutely. Reproduction is tremendously more expensive than replacement, but we don't ever have to deal with reproduction in a math example in this class. You would only deal with replacement costs. So as far as just from a theory standpoint, just know that reproduction is used on primarily historic properties and is much more expensive than replacement. Everybody good with that? The specific math way that we talk about replacement in this chapter is called the square foot method. It means that the properties just have a dollar cost replacement per square foot, and we're simply going to multiply that times the size of the building. That's it. This is by far the most common way to do a cost replacement approach, and it's the way we're going to do in the class for the math. Square foot method. It's the least accurate, but it's the most common because it's the easiest. There are two other ones called the quantity survey method and the unit in place method. Those are on the bottom of page 487, and you don't have to know anything about them other than they're much more detailed, much more accurate than the square foot method, but never used because they're way hard. I mean, just to give you an idea, like the quantity survey method, we need 72,547 pounds of nails. We need 6,850,487 board feet of lumber. Who's got time for all of that? Nobody does that. Now, would that be a very accurate way to figure the cost of a building? Yeah, no question. But who's going to figure it all out? The only time you see you see the quantity survey method is with like government projects where they have cataloged down to every screw and nail what went into the property. Okay? But we always use the square foot method. Now, you need to know this slide. Probably should make it like flashing light bright color. They're going to ask you about this stuff on a test. It's probably one of the few theory things you're going to get from the cost approach. It's on page 488. This idea of depreciation. Remember, we said when we talk about cost properties or special use properties, they always decline in value over time, eventually until they're worth what? Zero. Well, they're never technically going to be worth zero because they're going to be worth what the land is worth. The land itself doesn't decline in value, but the structure will deteriorate to the point or depreciate to the point that it's valued at zero. Now, there are different ways we can describe that process of devaluing a structure. Different types of depreciation. There's physical deterioration. Something is breaking or is broken. Something's not working. The roof leaks. That's a physical deterioration. That's a type of depreciation. There's also something called obsolescence. Specifically a functional obsolescence. An obsolescence is, it's not desirable. What does being obsolete mean? Obsolescence sounds too fancy. What does obsolete mean? You don't want it anymore. Why not? It's completely outdated, out of date, out of touch. It's not what, there may not be anything wrong with it. Things that are functionally obsolete may function perfectly fine. They may do exactly what they were intended to do. It's just what they were intended to do is not what we want any longer. That's a functional obsolescence. So, you know, for example, an office building without air conditioning. Is that obsolete in today's world? Absolutely. Would that deteriorate the value of that property? No question. That is a functional obsolescence. A warehouse with no loading docks, but it has railroad trestle loading. That outdated in today's environment probably? Yeah. That's a functional obsolescence. They may work. Those railroad trestle loading spots may work. The problem is there's no railroad line there anymore. So it's not that they're broken. They're just obsolete. If you wanted to use a house, brass fixtures in the bathroom, that shiny yellow brass, right? Is that desirable by today's buyers? It could be absolutely nothing wrong with it. It functions perfectly well. But it is functionally obsolete because it's not desirable in the current marketplace. Is everybody getting this idea of functional obsolescence? Are we good with that? The thing about functional obsolescence is you can fix it. Because it's on your property. If I wanted to change those brass fixtures out, could I do it? Sure. We also have this thing down here called economic obsolescence. Economic obsolescence I can't fix. I can't change it because it's something outside of my property that is lowering the value of my property. There's a chemical dump on the property next door. If I live up in Briar Creek, it's a nice area. Is there an economic obsolescence in the area of Briar Creek? I don't know, say maybe a little bit south of there. Makes a lot of noise. The airport. That's an economic obsolescence. Does it diminish the value of those properties? Sure it does. Guess what? Buyers would pay more for them. Even as the obscene amounts they still pay for them. Guess what they would pay? More if they didn't have to hear the airplanes landing. Can you do anything about it if you own one of those properties? No, it's outside your control. That's an economic obsolescence. So the way to differentiate these in your head, a functional obsolescence is something that's within your control as the property owner, and economic obsolescence is something that's what? Outside of your control. But all of these are just examples of depreciation. It means the property is declining in value because of these factors. We good with all that? The airport is an economic obsolescence because it is something that brings the value of my property down, but I can't control it. It's outside of my property. It's outside of my control.
But wouldn't some people like to be closer to the airport?
Sure, but a greater number would like to not hear those airplanes. When you start selling properties up here in North Raleigh, take them and show them. You'll see people cringe. You show them that house, man, they be loving it. You think, yeah, we about to make an offer. And then you hear, and they're like, and you see the look in their eyes like, what was that? Well, that's just the 4:30, British Airways flight from London coming in on that 777 right there. And they're like, man, I can read the tail numbers. Yeah, you can. Pretty close. Sometimes you think you're under attack out there. Make sure your pictures are firmly attached to the walls. It's not that bad, but some of them it is. I mean, there are some that are pretty dang close, and so it does diminish those property values. Yeah, I mean, and there are definitely people. I mean, I've had a Delta pilot, and he wanted one like that. I mean, he's like, I can sleep better when I hear that. But he is dramatically outnumbered by the people who would prefer not to hear it. Okay. All right. So when we talk about calculating depreciation in the cost approach, that's an entirely different thing than the appreciation or depreciation that we just did in the sales comparison approach. In the sales comparison approach, they just give you an annual number, okay? In the cost approach, what you have to remember is that it's always doing what? There's never going to be appreciation because it's always what? Depreciating. It's always going down in value, and it's doing it. There's not any number they need to give you for the last 6 months because guess what? It's never going to change. It's depreciating at the same rate every single year because that's the way we look at cost properties. We say they start at 100% value and they go to zero over a very set amount of time. Yes, sir, Greg.
Would it be the same as tax depreciation on a structure?
It's very similar. The idea is very similar. Yes.
It's not going to be the same number.
Not going to be the same number, but the idea is the same. His question was, you can take depreciation on income producing properties on your income tax. You can, and was it the same idea? And the idea is exactly the same. The numbers are different, but the idea is used exactly the same. Okay? So, depreciation, you need to know two numbers. You need to know something called the economic life. The economic life is just the amount of time that the property is going to be economically useful. It's not the amount of time the property is going to stay standing up. Most properties far outlive their economic lifespan. I mean, think of abandoned warehouses. Are they still standing? But they're abandoned for a reason, because they've outlived their usefulness. Does that make sense? So the economic life of a property is the amount of time that we expect it to go from fully useful to completely not useful. So from 100% value to zero. That's the economic lifespan of the property, to go from 100% value to zero. Whatever amount of time it takes us to do that, it always goes from 100 to zero during that economic lifespan. Its effective age is just how far into that process it is. So, if the building's 15, if the building has an economic life of 50 years, then how much is it going to be depreciating on an annual basis? Well, I would just take that 100% that I start with. We start at what value? 100%, right? And how many years is it going to take us to go to zero if we have a 50-year economic life? So if I divided this by 50, wouldn't I figure out how much it's depreciating per year? So what's 100 divided by 50? 2% annually. So I've come up with my annual depreciation right there. It's depreciating 2% annually because it took it 50 years to go from 100 to 0. Does that make sense for everybody? And if we said that it had an effective age of 10 years, we would just multiply that yearly depreciation times 10 because it's 10 years old. Does everybody follow that line of thinking? So
I don't understand the effective age, I'm sorry.
the effective age is how far. I don't want to say how old it is because that's an oversimplification. But for your purposes of the math, it's how old it is.
How old it is thus far? Like, so you just go cheap guys.
That's right. That's exactly right. So let's look at this example. It says a building has a replacement value of 125. Can y'all read this one on your slides? I have to make sure you're high maintenance, so you know. A building has a replacement value of $125 per square foot, and it's 2,000 square feet. The building has an economic life of 50 years and an effective age of 15 years. How much has the building depreciated? Well, we need a starting point, and the starting point is the original value of the property. So how are we going to come up with that? We're going to take that $125 per square foot and multiply by what? The 2,000 square feet. So that tells us our building has a replacement value of $250,000. Is everybody good with that number? That's if it was brand new. It's worth $250,000. The problem is it's not brand new. How old is it? 15 years. So what we need to figure out is how much it has gone down in value in that 15 years. That's what the depreciation is. Is everybody good with me on that? So the way to do that is to take 100, because we always take 100 here, because we start at 100% value and we go to what? 0. So we take 100 and we're going to divide by its economic life. In this case, economic life is 50 years. So what's our annual depreciation? 2%. Well, calculate 2% of our property. If it's worth $250, what's 2% of that? $5,000? So it's depreciating $5,000 every single year. And how many years has it been doing that? For 15 years. So $5,000 a year for 15 years. How much is our depreciation? $75,000 in depreciation on that property. So let's revisit that formula again. And this is the one that's in your actual formula packet. The cost approach is 3 steps. Step 1, value the land as if it's vacant. And then you're going to add what? The replacement cost of the building. And then finally, subtract the depreciation of the structure. Now, here's where you got to be careful. Don't add these two together first and then do your depreciation. Notice, I didn't say subtract the depreciation of the total. What are you subtracting the depreciation of? Just the structure. So whatever your value is in here in step 2, that's where your depreciation is going to come from, because the land doesn't depreciate. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, so, let's look at one. You got your little handout. Go back to your valuation handout that we went over. Too far. And number 11. Number 11 says a worship facility is being valued for the purposes of determining the cost of insuring the facility. The building is located on a lot that's valued at $96,000, contains 4,200 square feet of usable area, and is 15 years into an expected economic life of 50 years. Using this information and knowing that the cost of replacing the structure itself based on building costs is currently $110 per square foot, what's the estimated value for this property using the replacement square foot method of the cost approach? So what are the 3 steps? Let's write them down so we can keep ourselves straight. What's step 1 going to be? Land value. Step 2 is going to be what? Replacement cost. And step 3 is going to be to subtract the what? Subtract the depreciation of just the structure. Okay? So, what do they tell us about the land value? $96,000. I love it when there's no math required. As far as the replacement cost, we're using the square foot method, so we just need to know the square footage and the value per square foot. So we've got 4,200 square feet times $110 per square foot. What do you come up with for a replacement value of that building? What is it? $462,000. Does everybody agree with that number? Okay. So the replacement cost is $462,000. And step 3 is going to be depreciation of just what? The structure. So to get the depreciation of the structure, we've got to first find the economic life. What is it in this case? 50 years. So we come down here and we want to take 100 and divide that by 50. So we've got 2% annual depreciation. Okay? And we're only depreciating the building, so we're only depreciating that $462,000. So $462,000 times 2% annually would be what? 90. What was that? 92,400? 9240. Thank you. $9,240 per year. And how many years has it done that? For 15 years. So 9240 times 15 years. What is my total depreciation on that property? $138,600. So land value plus the replacement cost minus depreciation. What do we come up with for the cost value of that property? 490 what? 419,400. How do we feel about that number? See, I think the cost approach is fairly straightforward.
Is 50 years a fairly common time frame?
Fairly. 40 to 60. What city in this country do you think has the shortest economic lifespan for buildings? Shortest, not in the state, in this country. Where do you get, not that the buildings deteriorate, but they just get tired of them. They're no longer economically useful, so they just tear them down and build something else. Las Vegas. Las Vegas. Shortest economic lifespan in the country. Implode them and build something else. You know what they use as an economic lifespan when they build a resort in Las Vegas? What they estimate? 25 years. They build it estimating that in 25 years they will tear it down. That's what those cost projections look like. That means they got to make a lot of money in that 25 years. Okay? Does this make sense? I think it's fairly straightforward, right? It's just land value plus replacement cost minus
You could also
appreciation.
divide it by the years, couldn't you? Take
You
the
can.
Life and, I mean, the cost and divide it up by.
You can do that. You can do that. That's exactly right. I've had people do it that way. Okay? Good? Everybody good on that one? All right, 2 down. Last one. All right, let's take a last break, and then we will come back. All right, last section here, and then we will be done with chapter 17, which is a big accomplishment because it's a big chapter, a lot to digest. The last approach to value that we need to talk about is called the income capitalization approach. The income capitalization approach. So here's what you need to think of first about an income producing property. The value of an income producing property is directly tied to the income it produces. That's the only thing that we care about. So when we look at this, there's no theory to talk about here. This is all math. When you value an income producing property, there's nothing to take into consideration except how much money this thing produces. Does that make sense for everybody? So right away we dive into the math equation. And this is the math formula you've got in your math formula packet for the income approach. And what it says is that the value of an income producing property is equal to the net operating income divided by something called the capitalization rate. So let's talk about a capitalization rate for just a second. A capitalization rate is just a rate of return. Return means profit. So it's a rate of profit. It's a rate of how fast you get your money back. If you say you have a 9% capitalization rate, that means you're getting 9% of your investment back every single year, right? Does that make sense for everybody? So income producing properties, or investors, when they purchase income producing properties, they shop based on capitalization rate. If I'm an investor and I'm looking at a place to invest my money, I'm not necessarily looking at buying a car wash. I'm looking at buying a car wash that produces a certain return on my investment. Does that make sense for everybody? So what I pay for that car wash is not going to be dictated by what they list it for. It's going to be dictated based on what this formula throws out for a value. I'm simply going to look at how much money it produces, the net operating income, and then I'm going to divide that by the capitalization rate. Well, people ask me all the time, well, where does the capitalization rate come from? If I'm the investor, where does it come from? Me. If this is my rate of return, it comes from me. I say what the capitalization rate is going to be. If I want a 10% return on my money, guess what I plug in as the capitalization rate? 10%. And so if I know the property's net operating income and I want a 10% return on my money, can I not calculate what I'm willing to pay for that property? Does everybody follow that line of thinking for an investment property? This is exactly how investors shop. So we've got an example. You need something, Greg? Oh, okay. Make sure. So this is an example. The income approach. The investment property has the following characteristics. 50 units that rent for $800 a month. Annual vacancy rates that equal 8% of gross potential income. A 10% property management fee. Annual property taxes of $30,000. And other operating expenses of $58,000. So far, this looks real similar to some of the math we did in the property management chapter, right? Well, guess what? It's the same formula. It's the same formula. If similar investment properties have generated an annual capitalization rate of 9.3%, what's the value of the property? So we go back to our formula right here. They want to know the value. The value is going to be net operating income divided by capitalization rate. So we need to know the net operating income of the property, and we need to know the capitalization rate of the property. And I've got the full question over here on the left to kind of give it to you as a reference point. Well, we know the cap rate. They just gave it to us. They said the capitalization rate is what? 9.3%. So we don't need any math right there. We just plug in 9.3%. But we've got to come up with the net operating income. And what formula are we going to use for that? That before tax cash flow formula. Remember that big long formula? Because right here, before you get all the way to the end, equals net operating income. So to calculate that net operating income, we're going to need all of this information right here. 50 units that rent for $800 a month, vacancy rates 8%, 10% property management fee, taxes of $30,000, property taxes of $30,000, and other operating expenses of $58,000. All of that's going to help us get to a net operating income. So, to get to net operating income, we have to first calculate our gross potential income. That's going to be 50 units times $800 per month is $40,000 monthly, times 12 months a year is $480,000. Does everybody see where that gross potential income comes from on this property? Everybody good with that number? And then they told us that we had a 8% vacancy rate. So 8% of $480,000 is $38,400. If we subtract that out, we get a gross effective income of $441,600. And then remember, gross effective income minus all of our operating expenses will give us NOI. So operating expenses, the first one is our 10% management fee. So that's $44,160. And then we've got $30,000 in property taxes, $58,000 in other operating expenses. So that's total operating expenses of $132,160. Everybody follow with that? Subtract that out, you've got an NOI of $309,440. Well, once you've got net operating income, we're ready to calculate the value of this property, because we know the cap rate. They gave us the capitalization rate of 9.3%. Now we have the net operating income. It's just going to be that NOI, $309,440, divided by that 9.3% capitalization rate. And that gives us a value for that property of $3,327,000 and change. That's what an investor would be willing to pay for that property if they needed a what kind of return on their money? 9.3%. If they needed a 9.4%, would they be willing to pay this amount of money for it? What would they be willing to pay if they needed 9.4%? Less money. Because the higher this number goes, the lower this number goes. The higher your capitalization rate is, the less the property's worth to you, because what's not changing is the income. The NOI doesn't, you can't change the NOI. The property is producing what the property produces. Unless you change what? What could you change and change the NOI? Rent. Expenses. You can lower expenses, raise rent, you know. That would change that picture. Does everybody understand the math here? There's no theory to look at. So let's go back over to that worksheet again and look at this last question. It says a rental property has 80 units that rent. I think we've actually seen that before, haven't we? Sorry. We've done that. Let's go to 14. John is an appraiser who's been tasked with finding the value of an apartment complex that has a total of 36 units. 24 of these units have 3 bedrooms and rent for $1,100 each monthly. The remaining 12 are 2-bed units that rent for $900 monthly. Over the past year, the properties experienced 6% losses in vacancy and collections. They have annual operating expenses that total $185,000, including a 10% property management fee. Other similar apartment complexes are found to have a 9% capitalization rate based on John's market research. Based on this information, what is the estimate of value for the property using the income capitalization approach? So, first thing we need to do is come up with, we've got the cap rate. Remember, our formula looks like this for the value. It equals NOI over value times what? Cap rate. And we know the cap rate is what? 9%, right? They told us the cap rate is 9%. So what we need to get to value is NOI. We've got to calculate this property's net operating income. So to do that, we start with gross potential. We've got 24 units that rent for $1,100 a month, 12 months a year. Let me get my calculator out here. 24 times 1,100 times 12. I come up with 316,800 for those 24 units. And then it says the remaining 12 are 2-bed units that rent for $900 a month times 12 months a year. So 12 times 900 times 12 equals another 129,600 in income. So if I add those together, I come up with $446,400 for gross potential income. Is everybody okay with that? For gross potential? Now, what do we need to subtract out of there first? 6% vacancy and collection losses. We need to subtract the vacancy. So minus 6%, which is going to be $26,784 for vacancy. Equals $419,616 gross effective income. $419,616. And then we want to start subtracting out our operating expenses. Now here's where you've got to be very careful of wording. It says the property has annual operating expenses that total $185,000, including a 10% property management fee. What are we going to do with that 10% property management fee? Ignore it, because it's already factored in. When they say operating expenses, well, the property management fee is an operating expense, right? That total this amount, including it, we don't need to do that math separately. They've already done it for us. So our operating expenses are just going to be that $185,000. And if we do the math on that, we come up with 234,616 as an NOI. Is everybody good with that? And that's the number we need to plug back in up here at the top of our formula. So 234,616 divided by a 9% cap rate equals a value of $2,606,844.44. They didn't ask me to round it, did they? No. $2.6 million for that property. Just plug them in. That income capitalization approach. So if they ask you what you're doing with the income capitalization approach, all you're doing is converting the property's income into an estimate of its value. That's what the income capitalization approach is. It just takes the income and converts that into value of the property. Any questions on that one? Are we okay with that? If you know how to calculate NOI, then doing the income capitalization approach is easy, because that's the real The tough math of this is knowing that formula, that before tax cash flow. So you've already kind of knocked that out up to this point. All right, last thing, back in your slides here. Something called a gross rent multiplier. A gross rent multiplier is the last thing they mention in this chapter, and it really is just for houses that are income producing. If you buy a residential property and it's an income producing property, the problem with the income capitalization approach is you might not have a net operating income, because a lot of times if I'm buying a house and I plan to rent it out, it's not currently being used for that purpose. What's it currently being used for? As a house. So I don't have like expenses. I don't have rental income history. I don't have anything that it would normally take me to get. Think of all those numbers it took us to get to an NOI. I don't have any of that. So we need a shortcut method for homes, for residential properties. And that shortcut method is called a gross rent multiplier. It's just the number of months it takes you to get your money back. It's just the number of months it takes you to get your money back. Because if you look at the formula, it's purchase price divided by the monthly rent. So if you have a gross rent multiplier of 120, it would take you 120 months at the current rent to get your money back, which is how many years? 10 years, right? It would take you 10 years to get your money back. So what's going to be better as far as a gross rent multiplier goes? A higher gross rent multiplier or a lower gross rent multiplier? Lower, because you'd like to get your money back in a shorter amount of time. So I don't think I have one on your packet there, but I'm gonna write one down. I got you an example here, and then we'll just write one down. It says a rental home generates monthly income of $1,450. If the owner investor purchased the home for $172,000, what is the gross rent multiplier? Well, gross rent multiplier just equals purchase price divided by monthly rent. So $172,000 divided by $1,450, it means it would take us 118.62 months to get our money back. So the gross rent multiplier is 118.62. And you don't need to know any expenses. You don't need to know anything. It's just monthly. It's just purchase price divided by monthly rent. Everybody good with that? And just like investors shop for income producing property with capitalization rate, they set the capitalization rate. Investors also set their own gross rent multiplier. They will decide what they pay for a house based on a gross rent multiplier. They'll simply say, I'll buy anything that's got a gross rent multiplier of 100 or less. I'm not saying that's everybody's magic number. I'm saying that might be at Everette. They may just say, anything with a gross rent multiplier of 100 or less, I'll buy it. I don't care how much it costs. Because I'm getting my money back so fast, it doesn't matter. Because the investor is going to be the one who sets that bar. Does that follow for everybody? Because it's just a return on their money. That's all they're looking for. So let's just do one real quickly. I'll write one down for you. All right, let's say Sam is purchasing an investment property with current monthly rent of $1,200. Oops. Wrong place for the comma. $1,200. What is the GRM, gross rent multiplier, if he pays $147,000 for the property? second to write it down. Sam is purchasing an investment property with current monthly rent of $1,200. What is the gross rent multiplier if he pays $147,000 for the property? So what do we say? What does our formula say we need to do? To calculate gross rent multiplier, if we draw our T-bar, it's going to be purchase price or value divided by monthly rent. Gives us a GRM. So, purchase price of $147,000 divided by monthly rent of $1,200. What's our gross rent multiplier? 122.5. I'm sorry? A little over 10 years. Yep. 10 years and 2 months. Let's do one. I'll give you one more real quickly. I will release you from your terror when you show me a correct answer. Yeah. Have a good week. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Those of you that are leaving, you can watch the videos on closing the transaction for next week. That's where we will be. We will be in closing the transaction. Yes. It's close. There's a magic word you skipped over. Triplex. How many units are there? Yes, ma'am. Good. Good. Yep. Not 88. Have a good week, guys. Triplex. $800 per unit. So how many units do we have? So you got to multiply by. Remember, the formula is gross rent multiplier is monthly rent times gross rent multiplier equals value. Yep. Yes, sir. What you got? Yes, ma'am. It is indeed. You feel good about that answer? You should. Yeah. Closing the transaction. Closing the transaction, which is chapter 21.
So read chapter 21?
Yes, and I would read it and maybe watch the video for it. 80. 80. No. Paper in here. Okay. Where's your answer? 264? That's it. Yep. It is. I just want to make sure you're confident. You should be like, that's it right there. Yes, sir.